Before this story begins, listen closely. If you love jaw-dropping military stories where arrogance collides with hidden authority, where one sentence can silence a room and shatter careers, then hit subscribe right now and join thousands across the USA who never miss these moments of raw power and justice. Because this story proves that respect isn't demanded by volume, but commanded by rank. And it all began on a rain-soaked evening at a joint naval strategy symposium in Norfolk, where polished shoes echoed across marble floors and egos were just as sharp as the creases on dress whites. And no one noticed the woman standing quietly near the back of the hall, her uniform immaculate yet deliberately unadorned, ribbons aligned with surgical precision, but without the ostentatious rows that screamed for attention. Her posture relaxed in a way only someone with nothing to prove could manage. And when Admiral Richard Harlan, a legend in his own mind and feared for his biting sarcasm as much as his past service with the SEALs, stepped onto the stage, the room shifted as if pulled by gravity, his reputation preceding him like thunder, known for dismantling junior officers with a smile and a joke sharp enough to draw blood. And as he launched into his speech about leadership, accountability, and the so-called decline of discipline in modern forces, his eyes scanned the crowd hunting for a target, landing at last on her, the woman who hadn't reacted to his entrance, hadn't straightened or flinched, hadn't offered the reverent nod he had come to expect. And with a smirk curling his lips, he interrupted himself mid-sentence, pointing casually in her direction and asking in a tone dripping with amusement, "And you there, Commander? Or is it Lieutenant? What's your rank?" The room froze, a collective intake of breath rippling outward, because everyone knew this game and how it usually ended. Humiliation served cold under the guise of humor, and she felt dozens of eyes on her as she slowly lifted her gaze, meeting his without challenge or fear. And for a moment, the silence stretched just long enough to make his smile twitch. But when she spoke, her voice was calm, steady, carrying effortlessly across the hall as she said, "Fleet Commander." And the effect was done. Another, some already realizing the magnitude of what had just occurred, others still processing. And Harlan cleared his throat, attempting to recover, chuckling awkwardly as if it were all a misunderstanding. But the damage was done, and she continued without raising her voice, stating her name, Mara Ellison, and clarifying that she was currently serving as acting fleet commander for Special Operations Integration, a role so compartmentalized and classified that even many admirals were unaware her instantaneous and absolute, as if sound itself had been cut from the air. Admiral Harlan's expression collapsing into something unreadable, his mouth parting slightly, eyes narrowing not in anger but in calculation, because fleet commander wasn't a rank thrown around lightly. It wasn't a ceremonial title or an honorary position. It was authority incarnate, oversight of entire operational theaters, and the whispers began immediately, confusion mixing with disbelief as officers glanced at one. It existed, let alone who occupied it. And the reason she was here, she added, was to observe, not to perform, not to posture, and certainly not to be mocked. And with that, the power dynamic in the room inverted completely. Harlan stepping back from the podium as if it had suddenly grown hot beneath his hands, memories flashing through his mind of briefings he'd skimmed, redacted pages he'd ignored, and warnings about oversight he'd dismissed as bureaucratic noise. Because Mara Ellison wasn't just another officer climbing the ladder. She was known in whispers as the architect behind several joint operations that had redefined modern naval warfare, a strategist who never sought credit, whose fingerprints were on victories attributed to others. And as the symposium attempted to continue, the tension lingered like smoke, officers hanging on every word she spoke when she was later invited to the stage, not as a courtesy but as a necessity, and she spoke not of theory but of consequence, of decisions made in silence that saved lives no one would ever know were at risk. And as the night wore on, fragments of her past surfaced in hushed conversations. How she'd begun as a surface warfare officer before volunteering for programs so classified they didn't officially exist. How she'd served alongside SEAL teams, not as support, but as command authority, earning their respect, not through bravado, but through competence under fire. And how Admiral Harlan himself had once benefited from his on-extraction call she'd authorized against the recommendations of 3 senior officials. A decision that had saved his unit during a mission gone catastrophically wrong years earlier, though he'd never known who'd made that call. And now, as realization dawned, his earlier mockery took on a bitter edge, because the woman he'd tried to belittle was someone who had quite literally held his life in her hands. And the twist didn't end there, because the following morning, an emergency closed-door session was convened, attendance mandatory for all senior officers present, where Mara Ellison revealed the true purpose of her visit. An evaluation of leadership culture within high command, prompted by a series of anonymous reports detailing patterns of arrogance, dismissal of junior input, and the weaponization of humor to silence dissent. And as she spoke, examples were cited, incidents anonymized but unmistakably familiar to those involved, including one from the previous evening. And while no names were spoken, every eye drifted toward Harlan, whose face had gone pale, the room understanding that this was not a public shaming, but something far more dangerous, a professional reckoning. And when the session concluded, no immediate actions were announced, leaving a vacuum of uncertainty that gnawed at everyone. And weeks later, the consequences quietly unfolded. Harlan reassigned to an advisory role stripped of operational command, the move framed as routine but understood by those who mattered, while Mara Ellison returned to the shadows, her name absent from press releases, her rank rarely spoken aloud, yet her influence unmistakable, shaping doctrine, redefining leadership expectations, and reminding everyone who'd heard the story that respect in the military isn't about volume, tradition, or swagger. It's about responsibility carried without spectacle. And somewhere in the corridors of command, whenever an officer is tempted to mock instead of listen, the memory lingers of the night. A SEAL admiral asked her rank mockingly and went silent, hearing two words that changed everything: fleet commander.